At the time of recording this video, the ban list is still very, very new. In fact, it's only been out for a couple hours, and yet I'm already wanting to build new decks. And the deck that I really think wins from this ban list is Frogs, because Frogs had a hard time last format. They couldn't really deal with Spiral Resort after it resolved. They could hit it with like the Dust Tornado Paleozoic, but if Spiral Resort resolved, then a ton of their cards were dead, and they also could not beat Spiral Sleeper going second. Sleeper would take out 4 back row by the time your opponent's turn came around, and that was way too much for this deck to compete. And also Pendulum Magicians could be pretty overpowering when they search the trap card. However, Spirals are going to be out of the picture, and even if they are in the picture, they only have 1 resort, so we can take care of that. And then Pendulum Magicians, while they are probably going to still be very good, we can now main deck a lot more hate towards them just because Spirals aren't going to be as prevalent. And also, the Pendulum Magician deck is a lot more inconsistent. They're a lot more susceptible to Ash Blossom now that they really need that Duelist Alliance search, because Duelist Alliance is now the only card in the deck that can search the trap card, and the trap card is incredibly important. So I think Frogs are going to be good. And also, we got a whole bunch of trap cards back, and those trap cards happen to fit very well in a deck centered around trap cards. So let's talk about Frogs. This is just sort of my work in progress, but I think it's pretty strong. First, we have 3 copies of Swap Frog, and I think most people know this card's going to be really good just in general. Swap Frog's like the one card you want to open to just like win the game immediately. We also have 3 copies of Dupe Frog, pretty unsurprisingly, and 2 copies of Rodent Totem. So that's going to be your Frog engine. Well, I guess Rodent Totem's a toad, not a frog, but that's neither here nor there. We also have 2 copies of Traptrix Myrmeleo. Now I know I just made that video talking about how this card isn't very good, but one of the things that I wasn't even considering happening was Bottomless Trap Hole going to 3. Now if Bottomless Trap Hole goes to 3, this card suddenly becomes very valuable, because for the whole time Myrmeleo was out, Bottomless Trap Hole was never at 3. Bottomless Trap Hole hasn't been at 3 in a really long time in the TCG, and now it's at 3, and I think Myrmeleo is a great way to search it. We can now get some pretty nutty hands where we have like Swap Frog, Myrmeleo, and any water, where we end with Totally Awesome and then a Bottomless Trap Hole. It's a pretty good setup, and Bottomless Trap Hole happens to be very good against Pendulums. For the hand traps, we're still going to play 3 Ash Blossom. There's no Max C anymore, but Ash Blossom's really good, and it's really good because it's so powerful against the Pendulum deck, whereas before they had sort of all these search effects. They had Double Iris Magician, they had Skull Crobat Magician, they also had Duelist Alliance, obviously, but now that Duelist Alliance is like the main searcher, we can just save the Ash for the Duelist Alliance, and we can hit them every single time, and usually that'll put them in a pretty bad spot, because the Pendulum deck doesn't have a lot of defensive cards outside of the trap card. Without the trap card, they'll pretty much just always end on like a Vortex Dragon, and Vortex Dragon is a lot easier for Paleozoics to deal with, because believe it or not, Paleozoics are pretty good at dealing with established boards. It's just those established boards need to be able to be targeted, and that was the problem with Spirals, is that all their cards couldn't be targeted when they have Resort up. It was really hard to take out their board. But the Magician deck doesn't really have any non-targeting or cards that are prevented from being targeted, so we can usually take them out pretty easily. But Ash Blossom's at 3. We also have 2 Effect Failure. The only reason I wasn't going to main deck this card in this format was because of Spiral Resort, but without Spiral Resort as like a huge issue, we can safely main this card. This is the best counter to Heavy Metal Foe's Electromite. It is like such a shutdown. You just completely stop all of its effects. They don't gain any advantage off of it. Puts them in a really difficult position, and a lot of times they need that search, so it's very good. So Effect Failure is great. It's also pretty good against Trickstars if you're afraid of that deck. Although this deck honestly has a great matchup against Trickstars, so if Trickstars do become really popular, this is definitely a good deck as well. Now for the spell cards, we have 2 Cosmic Cyclone, pretty good all-around generic back row removal. I think field spells are still going to be big with Trickstars, but I also think that the card's just good in general. And really, I think one of the other big winners is going to be ABCs from this ban list. Nothing that they have got hit, and some of their harder matchups got easier. So much like Frogs, they're going to suddenly become more relevant just because their bad matchups are not around as much anymore. And this card's going to be good against ABCs. We also have 1 copy of Regeki for hopefully helping break boards. We have 1 copy of Soul Charge, and then, yes, finally, we have 1 copy of Monster Reborn. We got this gorgeous LOB1. It's not first ed, unfortunately, but it's still cool looking. And I don't think Monster Reborn is that good in general. I think a lot of the better players have pointed out that it's basically a worse Soul Charge. Every time you activate Soul Charge, just imagine, okay, what if I was only bringing back 1 monster instead of like 2 or 3 or 4? Because the Soul Charge life points don't matter that much. The Soul Charge battle phase doesn't matter that much. But the fact that you can bring back so many monsters is really great. But Monster Reborn can only bring back one. And yeah, I can grab stuff out of your opponent's graveyard. That's probably going to cheese some wins. But I don't think the card's as good as people are hyping it up to be. However, in this deck, it's very good. Because the reason you're playing Soul Charge in this deck is that when you open Swap Frog, you can instantly send a Frog monster to the graveyard and then Soul Charge for one monster to make it totally awesome. And if you're only using Soul Charge for one monster, well then obviously Monster Reborn is just a lot better. So I think Monster Reborn is perfect in this deck, although once again, I'm not sure how good it will be in other decks. I'm sure people will play it, but I'm not sure if it'll be like game-breaking. If we compare it to like Snatch Steel, when Snatch Steel came back, people like freaked out, and rightfully so, because it like really warped the format. I don't think Monster Reborn is going to do that. Anyway, on to the trap cards. We have 3 of the Dust Tornado Paleozoic. This guy is always good, so we're still going to play him at 3. One Paleozoic that just got a lot better is Paleozoic Canadia. So the problem with this card was that if you open multiple copies against Spiral, and you didn't have a way to stop Resort, when they activated Resort, well now all of your Canadia copies are dead because you suddenly can't target any of their things, and then the things that you could target, the non-Spirals, would be their Link monsters, but then those can't be flipped face down, so this card was terrible against Spirals unless you also had the Dust Tornado guy to back it up. And now that Spiral Resort won't be a big issue, this card's going to be great. It's also pretty good against Pendulums as well, because you can flip their guys face down and then they can't Link Summon into Heavy Metal Foe's Electromite. So those are the 3 of Paleozoics. For the 2 ofs, we have 2 Paleozoic Dino-Miscets. It's okay. I mean, it's always going to be kind of a bad card just because there's not a lot of things you want to discard in this deck. It's kind of bad for the same reason that the Paleozoic that is a Destiny draw is bad, just because you don't really want to leave stuff in your hand in this deck. But we have tons of stuff that we can discard if you really need to. You can usually discard dead Paleozoics if you don't want them in a certain matchup. One of the actual Paleozoics that you'll likely discard is Paleozoic Marilla, which we're also playing 2 copies of. So you sometimes want to discard this. Sometimes you can discard something you add back with Totally Awesome. But in general, this card is not that great. But it is pretty good spot removal. At least, so the biggest problem with this card last format, speaking of Dino-Miscets, was that a lot of times you were hitting Spiral Resort with it, and then you were just taking a straight -1 as like a MST, and that's not very good. But it's probably okay now. And then 2 Marilla, you just activate one to send the other, put it in the grave. We have a lot more normal trap cards now, so we can really take advantage of these cards. So, yeah. That's it for the Paleos. We are going to be main decking 3 Anti-Spell Fragrance. I think this card is necessary. I think Pendulums are going to be still a really good deck. And I was playing this card even when Spirals were around. It wasn't game-breaking against Spirals. A lot of times it did help the matchup, but it wasn't like broken like it is against Pendulums. But now that Pendulums have even less access to a lot of their ways to get rid of this card's going to be really good. So definitely going to play Anti-Spell in the main. We also have 3 Bottomless Trap Hole. Holy crap, I know I keep talking about this card, but I cannot believe Bottomless Trap Hole is at 3. It makes so many matchups so much easier for this deck. One of the reasons that I was playing the Volcanics in this strategy was because it didn't have a lot of like mass removal for like Pendulum summons and for big soul charges and stuff. Bottomless Trap Hole really meets that criteria. It takes care of huge Pendulum summons and puts your opponent so far back, and you can search it with Myrmilio, and it triggers the trap cards. Now, I'm not playing Torrential Tribute, and the reason I'm not doing that is because anytime that you Torrential, if you chain a Paleozoic, well then the Paleozoic's going to die, and that's kind of sad. So I'm not playing Torrential. Maybe you would like side deck it, but I don't think that card's good in this deck. At that point, Bottomless is just a better version because usually Torrential's only going to hit like 1 or 2 cards, and Bottomless can already do that. And Torrential destroys them instead of banishing them. Bottomless is just a lot better, and we don't even really have the room for Torrential. But man, I am so pumped for Bottomless. I'm not even sure if you really have to play the Myrmilios, but definitely keep the Bottomlesses in there. Now, we have the new and improved Solemn Brigade. So we have 3 copies of Solemn Strike, 1 copy of Solemn Warning, and 1 copy of Solemn Judgment. Once again, a nice looking ultra rare, but not a first ed. But, oh man, these cards are really, really good. It helps that a lot of the stuff that your opponent would be using these cards on in our deck, like Totally Awesome, you'll gain back advantage when they destroy them. But I think this card's going to be pretty controversial. To me, it seems like a new sort of Vanity's Emptiness, a card that even the decks that don't play a lot of traps are just going to play 1 copy of to secure their boards. We already saw a lot of decks playing Solemn Scolding as their only trap card, and I think Solemn Judgment will now replace that almost right away in every single deck. And also, this buffs Counter Fairies, if people care about that deck still, but I don't think it's going to be that good, even with Solemn Judgment. But the new improved Solemn Brigade, Oh my gosh, this is so good. With like, this is another reason that I think the frog deck is going to be good, because we have Solemn Judgment back. That's crazy. So many good trap cards. You got to play a trap deck, you know? And yeah, I realize there's like Hey Trunade and stuff, but the difference between this deck and a lot of the other backer decks is that our deck can actually negate Hey Trunade with Totally Awesome. Speaking of, let's go to the extra deck. We do have 3 copies of Totally Awesome. Very good card. 2 copies of Paleozoic Opibania. 1 copy of Paleozoic, however you pronounce that guy. And then for the non-water guys, we have the Phantom Knight's Chris Javelin, Crumble Logos. Those cards are very similar, but they're not quite the same, so you need both. 1 Sky Cavalry, 1 Daigusto Phoenix, 1 Cat Shark. All pretty standard stuff here. I've actually been playing like the same frog extra deck for a long time now. Really, I just think that these are like the best numbers. For the links, we have 2 Mistar Boy, 1 Proxy Dragon, and 1 Decode Talker. You could consider playing the Overclock guy, the guy that has a left arrow and a down arrow, and he's a common from Extreme Force. That card's really good in a lot of decks, but in this deck, you can usually just make Mistar Boy. But Decode Talker and Proxy Dragon are really in there, because a lot of times you'll steal a monster with the Totally Awesome, and then it's not a water monster, so you have to make some link monster and you go into these. But one of the most common plays is making Mistar Boy, then Proxy Dragon, and then making 2 Toads next to them. Sorry, 2 Toads next to them. That's a pretty common play. With the Decode Talker, it comes up every once in a while, but you could consider playing the Overclock guy. But anyway, that is my Frog Traptrix deck profile. This is like the #1 deck that I wanted to put together as soon as I saw the ban list was announced. I didn't even really mention it in the video, but yeah, as I like closed the video down and I was rendering it, I was like, man, frogs are like really good with all the bottomless trap holes and Solemn Judgment, and now they don't have to deal with Spiral Resort. They really don't even have to deal with really crazy pendulum boards. So I think this deck's gonna be pretty cool. I still plan on taking FA to some regionals, but I think that frogs could be a really good rogue contender. But anyway, I'll see you guys later. Bye.